Welcome to Pullback. I'm Kyla Hewson, and I'm here with Kristen Pugh.
Hello.
Each episode, we challenge ourselves to try something new in ethical consumption, and then we tell you what we learned, fuck-ups and all. This week, we're reacting to the Seaspiracy video, the Netflix documentary that has come out and is creating a stir in the online world. It was Kristen's idea to do a reaction to this, and I watched it, and it was upsetting for me for a lot of reasons. I'm excited to talk about it. I feel like watching the film was the challenge for this week. And we're here with Robbie. Sorry, Robbie.
No worries. I was like, when am I going to get that introduction?
We're professionals.
But yeah, I think watching the film was the biggest challenge of the week.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes. So we are here with our friend Robert Miller, who has joined us on a few of our previous episodes. And he watched this film like a champ. And we're going to talk about it now, I guess.
Watch this film on at least 1.25 times speed with a Red Bull, because that's what it took.
That's fair.
Oh.
I watched it because my friend and I have been she lives in the same building as me, so she's been like my one social contact, and we've been doing dinners a couple times a week. And she was like, hey, do you want to watch this fish documentary? And I was like, you're going to hate me. I'm going to just talk the entire time. And I sure did. We're still friends. It's fine.
My boyfriend came in, I was like 30 minutes into the film, and I was like, oh no, you can't watch. He's like, he's already vegan, and he doesn't like watching, obviously, graphic depictions of violence against animals. But I was like, I put this off to the very last minute, and I was like, I can't stop watching it, so I guess you're just going to have to join me for this. Sorry, I wasn't expecting you home just now. And I talked the whole time once he joined me, so I feel you.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat to him, because it's like, I have a very weird relationship with these kinds of movies, because what made me go vegan was watching Earthlings. I didn't even make it through the first, 30 minutes. And I just, went home, threw out all of the meat in my fridge, and, have not purchased any ever since. And so I have a deep loathing for these movies, because they're so gross and so awful and upset me so much. But I am also just everyone should watch these movies, but just one of them. You don't have to watch more than one.
Yeah, I went vegetarian for a while back in high school after watching Fast Food Nation, I think is what it was. But I've never seen Earthlings. It sounds good, I guess. That's quite the review from Robbie.
Yeah, for context, I was one of those people who unironically would tell vegans that for every animal they didn't eat, I would eat 3. That is an actual quote from my mouth as a shithead teenager.
That is a very Albertan thing to say.
Yeah. Then I watched the first 20 minutes of Earthlings, threw out all of the meat in my fridge, and I've become that obnoxious vegan who gets routinely invited onto podcasts to talk about veganism ever since.
Maybe now that we're 5 minutes into this, maybe we should explain what Seaspiracy is for people that haven't seen it.
Hey, that's what I was just about to say.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No.
I'll unstep on you.
Not at all.
Continue.
No, please. Do you want to give us a rundown of the movie, Kristen? Like a blow-by-blow of the plot?
Oh, I don't know if I want to give a blow-by-blow of the plot. I don't think I have that level of detail, but it is a movie it's basically this British guy that is I was doing beach cleanups and finding plastic on the ocean, and I wanted to find out what the problem was. And so then he goes and looks at whaling, and then he's like, wait a second, overfishing's a problem. And then that becomes the purpose of the movie. I don't know that I sold this very well, but it's about overfishing.
I feel like you gave it a fair description there, because it was wild to me that he's vegan. He's done other documentaries before, and it's wild to me that he framed this whole documentary I'm just learning all of these things for the first time, and I was like, what?
Yeah, I actually found that super obnoxious. It was just very contrived and silly as far as I was concerned. And I'll maybe talk about this more when we actually get into the subject matter of the film, but I think it actually kind of hurt a lot of its messaging. because it allows you to have this
Yeah.
like very wandering thing instead of focusing in on the real issues. So
Yeah. I mean, I did think it did a pretty good job in that it covered, like, if you were going to do a short documentary that covered all of the big themes about how, like, the fishing industry is fucked, it did at some point draw on most of the things that are fucked about fishing. So, like, overfishing, how fucked aquaculture is, you know, like,
Bottom trawling.
yeah, like the problem of illegal fishing, the problem of forced labor, like that stuff all did get in there. The fishing expert community is very pissed off about this movie.
yeah.
And they did get some things wrong, and they were mean to conservation NGOs in a way that I didn't think was fair. Like, there are problems with this movie, but I think if you're like a person that has never been exposed to the problems of overfishing, this documentary is a good one. Although I do think you could just listen to our 2-parter on seafood and it does a better job.
Yeah, we sure do.
And we have no budget, so.
So do we want to kind of like go through it chronologically?
I mean,
Yeah,
that's fine. I just, to bounce off what Kristen was saying, there was this one part where, like, he's, I know we're going to get to it eventually, but just when you were saying, oh, he was being unnecessarily mean to sea conservation, like, NGOs or whatever, there was one where I can't even remember which organization it was, but he kept just going back to this one blog post on their website that probably has, like, tons and tons and tons of content and being like, look, you guys don't say that not eating fish is a solution. You say it right here with this one word on this one blog post. And he just like shows that like 3 or 4 times in the episode or in the documentary. And I was like, what are you? No, this feels petty.
well, it's also like he's interviewing a single-use plastics charity. Like, what the fuck does he expect? You know, they're not a fishing charity. But, and it turns out his the stat on plastic and like the discarded fishing material, which he claims is like half of ocean plastic, it's from like decades ago and not accurate to the plastic in the ocean today. So
okay, well, that was the tangent that I wanted to get out before we got too far away from that.
yeah, Robbie, you had a structure. So
well, like one of the things that actually like really set me off on the wrong foot for this movie was just like the opening, where it's like set up as this very dangerous documentary where he's going to be going and like putting his life at risk, and you have all of these just like random people who are exploited for their sound bites after being exploited for their labor. And I would kind of like flag that as like, okay, is this actually going to be like gonzo war journalism style documentary? Because that was not the vibe that I'd seen from reviews. Or is this just like an extremely shitty way to open the documentary that is completely disjointed from what they do? And sure enough, like the only time that he ever puts himself in any danger is like accompanying the Sea Shepherds with a Liberian military escort.
well, he was also in Thailand doing the extremely irresponsible interview of those. I'm not. I wasn't clear on whether they were currently people in forced labor situations or formerly.
I think there are people who have gotten out.
Yeah. So I don't know. Either it was extremely contrived situation or it was extremely irresponsible from his perspective.
Yeah.
You know.
I found his investigative journalism style very obnoxious as well. I'm like, you're not asking people questions to get answers. You're asking people questions to get reactions. He wasn't trying to actually get information out of anybody. He was like, why don't we all just go vegan? And people are like, well, I that's a stupid question. I that's not going to
it's like half of them were like, I don't disagree with you, but I'm a plastics campaigner. Like,
or when he was asking, when he snuck into what's it called?
the like whaling village, or is this a different part?
No, when he snuck into the
fishing market.
No, he snuck into so many places.
He snuck into so many places.
There were so many moments though where he was just like totally irresponsible, and it's just like, here is a guy just like shoving a camera in people's faces who probably get that all the time, and is suddenly like acting injured and like, oh, I'm the victim of a huge conspiracy against me. It's like, no, you're just a shithead.
Yeah, no, it was when he was at the convention center and he went to this one random guy and was like, is there slavery in Thailand fishing? And it's like, that's such an inflammatory question. Of course the guy's going to say no. That's not how you get an answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just insulting because, like, there is good journalism out there that will genuinely investigate forced labor in fishing. You know, there are NGOs doing this work, and they're responsibly going about talking to these kinds of, like, people in those situations and people in the industry. And I don't know, it left a really bad taste in my mouth, the way that he was approaching the subject matter. And, like, I think it has something to do with the fact that he flitted from topic to topic to topic to topic throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a very frenetic film, and you're just like, why?
Which, like, on one hand, I get it because, I mean, we talked about this in the seafood episodes, you know, like, there's just, I think we have an assumption about the way that fishing works, and it's a lot more idyllic than the reality. And so once you start to sort of, like, peel back the layers, there are 1,000 different topics that, like, you would want to look into. And it's hard to know what to cover in a documentary like that. But on the other hand, like, could have made the documentary longer, could have, you know, left out the whaling stuff that wasn't really all that relevant to what he was talking about, you know, the beach plastic.
Yeah, and, like, focused on overfishing. Because there were several areas that I was like, this would be really important. This would have been way better material than going to Taiji and just, like, pretending that you are the victim of this, like, huge conspiracy to block out journalists when it's really they just don't want their people being, like, shamed and exploited all the time. You're like, this could have been left out, especially because later on in the movie, they acknowledge that, you know, the dolphin cull in Taiji is entirely inconsequential. And so it's like, why did you put this in the movie then?
Yeah, I think it's meant to hook people in, you know, because you start with, like, a narrative about plastic that people already kind of buy into, and you start with whaling, which is already something people don't like. And then maybe you get attention long enough for people to, you know, realize that they're going to be, well, this stat is also overblown, but we're running out of fish in the ocean. Like 85% of fisheries are overfished. You know, it's a real crisis that people just don't want to pay attention to. So I get why he was kind of going that way, but there was so much time devoted to it. You could have spent 2 minutes with that opening and then done an actual interrogation of fisheries issues, and then crucially got into some public policy solutions at the end. Because, like, just telling people to go vegan, as much as that is something that I agree with as an outcome, it's not going to solve overfishing, you know, like.
Not at the speed that we need it to be solved. Yeah, that was my biggest gripe with the whole thing.
And there's a treaty on, like, the high seas that's being negotiated right fucking now. Like, if there was any time to be talking about public policy solutions to overfishing, it's this exact moment, you know? Anyway.
But we can roll it back and talk about that more at the end, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, like, the first, like, 20 or 30 minutes of the film are mostly just, like, him wandering around Southeast Asia bothering people. And then it gets into the part that I thought was kind of, like, good, which was talking about, like, sustainability labeling and how it was fraudulent.
Yeah, but he's also not correct on that. Like, so Dolphin Safe is not, there's a lot of variety in terms of how robust that label is, but, like, and no eco labels are perfect, but, like, there are genuinely eco labels that have good traceability standards, and they're not perfect. They are subject to some criticism, but it's not as though they don't do anything, you know? Like, I mean, if you take seafood mislabeling as an example, 30% of seafood is mislabeled, but if you go to, like, Marine Stewardship Council certified fish, it's 1%, you know? Like, that's a huge difference.
I really felt for the dolphin safe guy that he was interviewing. He must have interviewed him for at least half an hour, and he took, like, 1 10-second clip and just showed it. And it's like, what are you doing, man? That's not fair.
Yeah, and I mean, it does highlight something that's true. Like, it is the case that, like, these things are not being audited as frequently as they should be. That sustainability standards are limited. Like, the Marine Stewardship Council, for example, it's generally considered the best eco-label in seafood. And its only social requirement is that that organizations follow local, national, and international laws. So basically that means there's pretty much no standards, when it comes to social requirements. It's only if somebody's found to have been acting illegally for stuff like forced labor that they would be uncertified on social grounds. So there are real places to criticize these issues, but the picture that he gave of what these eco-labels are was just, it wasn't accurate. And I don't think it did any favors for a real conversation about the strengths and weaknesses of these kinds of regimes.
I mean, it's because he had an agenda, which was at the end of the film, just to be there's no other option but to go vegan, which honestly probably is true. But because he had to frame it in a way that feels kind of gross, it puts me off,
Yeah. Unless you're whale hunting by yourself, then that might be okay, was the conclusion of the thing.
Yeah, it's I had slightly less sympathy for those NGOs just because, I don't know, I'm probably more prone to believe that it's kind of scummy and largely irrelevant. Because that's kind of been some of my experience as well. Just the more you learn about, ethical animal agriculture, the less likely that I am to believe that any kind of ethical standards are real. And when you have someone on video who's just yeah, people bribe our auditors all the time. And you're like, really? It's acceptable to you and you still work here. I know that he gave him an incredibly unfair and extremely edited interview, but it's still those little moments like that I think do a good job of undermining the people who blindly look at those check marks and say, oh, but it has a check mark.
Yeah, I just think a more effective way of going about that, rather than badgering one guy from let's face it, not one of the best eco labels.
Yeah.
No fucking wonder he couldn't get an interview with MSC after the way he treated the other groups. But I think there are lots of real criticisms you can make. For example, one criticism that's levied against the Marine Stewardship Council, which is generally considered to be the best, is it's a label that fisheries that are already doing pretty well tend to apply sort of post hoc, there's no clear evidence that it actually changes behavior of fisheries. And so what it might be is kind of a trade barrier that benefits wealthy country fisheries at the expense of poor country fisheries. So that's a real criticism. And there's so much illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing that the lack of regulation, I think, prevents us from having real solutions, even if we have these private labels and even if we thought they were really good. So there's a real conversation you could have about whether private regulation is fundamentally limited. But just badgering a dude about dolphins, I don't know. I didn't find it that persuasive.
Not just badgering the one guy, but then just going into several interviews and just with people who are spokespeople who are not actual power holders, who are just I don't have an answer for you. And he's oh, look at them. They're terrible. You're do you just not understand how organizations work?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it does give an incredibly slanted version of these conversations. And I thought it was one of the most effective parts of the film, but not the most effective way of doing it. Yeah.
I did really like the part where he followed the money and he was oh, these are the people who fund these organizations and this is where...
Okay, but that was dumb too, Kyla, because the Earth Island Institute is just an environmental NGO. So yeah, no shit, they're going to fund 2 environmental initiatives. That's not a fucking conflict of interest.
I guess.
Sorry, Kyla.
No, that's true. That's fair. I don't mind. I can take it. But also, I don't know, the MSC, he was saying gets 80% of their money from certifying. So it makes sense to just certify everybody.
Yeah, that is true. That's a genuine conflict of interest it's a real criticism for sure.
If I remember correctly, that was also part of your episode on fishing, was that there was kind of this race to the bottom to certify the McFish.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there is a real debate. So this is a real thing anytime you're trying to set up eco labels, and it's been a real, depending on which side of the argument you're on, World Wildlife Fund either looks like a fucking champion or a fucking sellout. And there's really no middle ground. But World Wildlife Fund has made the calculus since the late 90s that they can make more change by partnering with big companies like Unilever to sort of mainstream environmental standards into industries. So they work with these companies to set up sustainability standards, and they like spin them out as these third-party initiatives. They're not exactly what environmentalists would want, but they are better than nothing. So they get a lot of criticism for that, but also they've made change. And it's like, that's a genuine debate you can have. It's like, do you want to have that model, or do you want to sort of like be pushing for stronger government regulation, including like a treaty that would cover, I mean, we were talking about this in the seafood episode, like the ideal is you have an international governance system where governments pool resources and have a bunch of auditors that regulate around the world. That seems unlikely to happen soon. So the imperfect calculation that WWF has made is like, we'll try to work with Walmart and Unilever. But like, you can criticize that. Like, you know.
Yeah, that's the thing about this whole documentary, was that he left out all of the nuance. And again, I recognize that it was short, but he just went in with so much conviction on every topic that he didn't leave room for nuance. So he just went in and was like, everything is evil except for eating vegan, and there's no argument to be had about any of it. And I was like, I see what you're doing, and I agree with the point in principle, but the way you're doing it is wrong.
Yeah. And one of the things that I kind of like was primed to go into this film with because of Twitter was just looking at who he was interviewing and where they were from. Because one of the things that I found deeply limiting for how the film proceeds is that he spends, 45 minutes talking about fishing issues in Southeast Asia and interviews exactly no one from Southeast Asia for more than 5 seconds. And I think that's a huge problem with the film, and especially in the way that it presents alternatives. And there's this very weird moment where, like, the Liberian section was, I think, probably the best part, like the best documentary part of the film, because he actually spends time talking to Liberians and putting them on camera, talking about why fishing is important to their way of life, even in just like the most brief sense. And I was like, that is a good part of the film, because at the end, it ends with this idea of like, there's no such thing as sustainability. And it's like, yeah, because you only talked to like Western commercial fishing and a couple of NGOs. It's like, maybe if you talk to some of the people living in these areas that are afflicted by overfishing, you would be able to tease out some kind of definition of sustainability based on their experiences living on the land as part of those ecosystems. But it just doesn't do that. It just goes in and exploits them for his narrative.
Yeah, also, like, I don't understand how you do a documentary about fishing where he spent, like, maybe 10 seconds talking about what bottom trawling is. Like, I know that shit's boring, but, like, they rake the ocean bottom. It's bad. There are some fishing methods that are genuinely a lot better than that. And a lot of the discussion around, like, what is sustainable fishing is around the tools and methods of the industry. And it just, to me, I mean, I'm not an expert. I learned enough to be able to do an episode of the podcast, and that was about it. But even so, like, I understood the basics of the different methods, and that seems to be really important if you're trying to understand what it is to be like, to have sustainable fishing. Now, it doesn't matter if your prior is really just to say that veganism is the best.
I mean, I feel like one thing that the film does do well, and that is, I mean, I'm glad that it's gone, I guess, viral. It does create a sense of urgency, which is that, like, yes, obviously policy is a way to go, and not everyone's going to go vegan overnight, and the only people who are watching this are probably people who are already more or less aware of the issues. And I mean, maybe other people are watching it and that would be great, but he does create that sense of urgency where it's like, we don't have time to mess around. I just wish he'd phrased it like that. I wish he'd been like, look, these are all of the options. These are all of the ways that we could save our oceans, but this is how long they would take. And that's why it's really important that everybody eats a more plant-based diet. But he didn't do that. He said, this is the only solution.
Yeah. And speaking, and like, yeah, there's all of this urgency, but none of that also like comes in through how the film is made. Like, as we mentioned at the beginning, that we spend like 30 minutes just going through relatively marginal threats to the ocean ecosystem in Southeast Asia. And then the big stuff gets the remaining half of the film. And one of the things that I don't like about that is that people aren't going to remember that there's like one bar graph that shows Taiji 1,000 dead dolphins a year, fishing in the US, 20,000 dead dolphins a year. People remember how much time you spend talking about these issues in the film. And so one of the ways that like a lot of people disengage from veganism is that they think, oh, well, the problem is people eating things in other places. Like they think, oh, China and Japan are the reason why the oceans are being emptied, because that's what we spend the most time talking about is, this stuff that's going on in Southeast Asia. And it's like, but it's really not. And it was another reason why I like the Liberian section so much, is because he just starts to talk about imperialism and colonialism and how those are tied into these issues. And then it just kind of disappears and isn't used to critically analyze his own actions, which are entirely replicating those narratives in how he treats Southeast Asia.
Yeah, it's very white savior complex. Yeah.
Oh, super. And so for me, it's like, this is clearly a film designed for Western audiences. It should clearly be talking about the complicity of Western consumption habits in causing the overfishing crisis. And, you get these tidbits of European Union subsidies. It never gets said, like, where are all of those Thai shrimp going? It's like all of those shrimp farmed through enslaved labor. What markets do they end up? And it's not Thailand. And so talking about these like imperial questions and focusing in and saying Western consumers are a significant portion of the problem doesn't really appear in the film. And especially because that feeds so well into the message that it's like Western consumption is so much of the cause of overfishing. And so Western consumers are uniquely positioned to be able to do something about that. Taking that anti-imperial narrative actually helps, but is clearly a blind spot for the film's creators.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about the gruesome footage, because I had sort of mixed feelings on it. I think on one hand, the fact that it showed like shark finning and like even sometimes it would show like the fish dying on board. And I hated looking at it the whole time. But like, I wonder what you guys think. Was it just like animal cruelty porn, or is there like, do you think that there's a value to showing that kind of footage?
I can jump in here. I still eat fish occasionally. And after seeing all of that gruesome footage, I'm not going to anymore. So at least one person has changed their diet based on the gruesome footage alone. So I would say, like, for me, it was effective. Was it too much? Probably. Was it really horrific for my poor vegan boyfriend? Yes, definitely. But did it serve a purpose? I think it did. Considering his end goal is to get people to stop eating fish, to show the cruelty in such a vivid way. I think it does serve his purpose. I don't know. What do you think, Robbie?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it at the beginning of our discussion, was that I got turned into a vegan because of imagery like that. So it's hard for me to really critique it as someone who was deeply affected by it, and it changed the outcome of my diet and my activism. So yes, they are extremely effective. Do I like it? No. Though one of the things actually that I did think was good is that, like, I knew all of the stats about fish farming. This was one of the sort of like the most effective, what I thought was the most effective presentation of data in the film. Was that I had never actually like seen conditions on a fish farm, even as like a vegan who follows these issues. And so that was interesting for me to just be like, oh yeah, these are horrifying. And then the poop visualization, like the Scottish poop dispersion, was, I thought, one of the most effective infographics in the film.
Yeah, and I also appreciated seeing, I agree with you. And I sort of conceptually knew what fish farms were like because I've read about it, but and including like, the issues of like dropout salmon that are just depressed and hang there. Like, so like I was familiar from a conceptual point of view, but I'd never seen one. And I had never seen what sea lice looked like before. And
Ooh, that was
Yeah, exactly. So even though we spent, like 3 hours on a previous episode talking about the horrors of the sea, I drastically cut down my consumption of fish. I've maybe had, since then, Kristen, I've probably had like 3 cans of salmon. But like, but now I'm just like, no, I'm not going to eat fish anymore. So I think that effectively makes me a vegetarian. But I'll check in with you for Veganuary next year and let you know how that's going.
one thing from the Faroe Islands scene. That one was particularly interesting from like that sort of like cruelty porn perspective, because like just seeing the shoreline completely inundated with blood was like deeply gross to me. But I had a hard time taking it seriously because he'd worn open shoes. And so I was just like sitting there thinking, like, you went to a whale slaughter, which you knew what it was going to look like, and you didn't wear boots. Like, you just wandered into the shore and you're just like wading in blood with open shoes. I was like, you fucking idiot.
I didn't even think about that. That's so
So it was this very disjointed experience for me.
Yeah.
The music that he played over that scene was what took me out of it. I'm like, okay, I get it. It's sad.
Yeah, it was a little overwrought.
The other thing, too, was like he was trying to make the point that, well, I guess he was also trying to make the point that it's like still bad, but like he was saying this is a sustainable way to hunt. And I was like, first of all, if your documentary is about how shitty overfishing is, why are you showing so much fucking footage of whaling on a small scale?
Yep.
When you directly make the point that that's like not what's causing it. Because like honestly, between that scene and at the beginning with like Taiji, that's probably like 3/4 of the footage of fish that we got throughout that film. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I didn't appreciate the level of like care and attention that he put on that scene with all of the music, and then he interviews one of the whalers versus the Taiji or any of the Asian footage that he uses where he doesn't.
That's true. That's so racist. I didn't even pick up on that. Wow.
Yeah. I was going to talk about that in terms of like, yeah, again, he never interviews fishermen except that one guy in the Faroe Islands. And it's such a huge problem when you're like, there's no definition of sustainability. All sustainability is marketing bullshit. Opens up the film to this very obvious critique of being anti-indigenous, because like they even tease it. They're like, oh, these Liberian fishermen and Somali fishermen were good, sustainable fishers who were feeding people. And then, their countries lost control of the seas and was pillaged. And this was bad. And it's like, okay, so we should talk to some of those fishermen about like getting actual narratives of sustainability, because this is often a blind spot that I find in vegan discourse, is that it comes out of this like Western environmental lineage where we view human beings as like alien from the ecosystems that we live in, that there's no possible way for human beings to be integrated into an ecosystem, to be one of those like apex species that manages ecosystem diversity and richness and actually contributes to ecosystem diversity and richness. And if we talk to indigenous people, if we talk to people living by the seas who have been there since time immemorial, as they point out, they have been in the film and then never talk about again, maybe those people would have definitions of sustainability that might actually be compatible with like a real definition of sustainability. This is one of the interventions that you start to get when you have like anti-colonial discourse around veganism and talking to vegans who aren't just white, and like actually talking to people who live in the world and are affected by these issues.
Oh, Kristen, maybe we should have invited somebody who is like we're falling into that trap ourselves.
But with an anti-oppression lens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to be probably my sign out at the end of the episode, is just some cool POC vegans you can follow instead of Seaspiracy.
Yeah, the whole time I was watching, like in the beginning of the film when they're talking about whaling in Japan, I just kept thinking about like the debates around seal clubbing in Canada and like how environmental organizations like had their head up their ass for a really long time about that and eventually came around.
In an entirely unsurprising turn of events, One of the first things that they did after airing Seaspiracy was to jump on board with an anti-sealing campaign.
Great.
Yeah. And you're just like, for fuck's sake.
Come on.
And people were theorizing, like, why did they do this? And it's like, because it's a very common white savior vegan issue, and it draws in a lot of money. Like, as much as they critique other NGOs for doing things to perpetuate their own activities and exploiting the issues rather than trying to solve them, jumping in on anti-sealing campaigns is that very thing in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
Yeah, so, yeah, white savior is going to white savior. I think that's probably one of the most salient criticisms of the film.
Yeah.
As like a broad stroke, is that it's just like, it is once again platforming a very like specific Western vision of environmental protection and not talking to the people who are affected by it.
Yeah, I'm also trying to look at who the guy was, because like he seemed to not have good journalist training. But
he did another documentary called Cowspiracy, which I assume...
same fucking guy. Yeah, okay. I didn't see that one, but
No, I didn't see it either, but based on this, I would assume it's the same or worse because it was an earlier work. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Just like, I mean, I wish I knew more about the situation, about those former like forced laborers, because I'm very concerned about their safety based on the way it was portrayed in the film, you know?
Mm-hmm.
If it's true that he actually had to flee from a facility that like authorities were going to come for him, first of all, like, why and what was the context? But secondly, like, what happened to those two dudes?
Yeah.
Anyway.
I assume, because it seems like a thing that would happen, that there are probably organizations in Thailand that are trying to help these people, that care deeply about this issue. And maybe instead of spending all of our time interviewing Western scientists, maybe we should have interviewed some of those people.
Yeah, and like good documentaries on these kinds of issues do that. I've seen a bunch on like, usually it's land agriculture issues, but like journalists will go in and they talk to the organizations, and it is always dangerous, but like a good journalist thinks in advance about how to protect their subject, and like thinks in advance about exit strategies and doesn't put their fucking taxi driver in the kind of situation that guy put him in. Like,
yeah, like it's very weird when you frame these people as like, oh, they were exploited for their labor, and now I'm going to exploit them for a soundbite for my film. And I'm like, this is really gross.
Yeah, and also, why was he filming the face of that taxi driver? Like, even when you blur it out, like,
yeah,
like that guy's still at risk. Like, you can figure out exactly where that video was taken just from like people are really good at tracking that kind of stuff just based on like small cues from the background, you know? So
yep. Super sketchy.
Did you want to go through any more of your notes, Robbie?
I think that was most of it. I do want to stan the Sea Shepherds just because they were in the film and I absolutely love them to death.
Do they work with the Liberian government now? Like, that was
apparently
new to me.
Yeah, that was new to me. I didn't realize that was part of their operations, but it is cool as fuck.
It is, yeah.
They were the coolest part of the film, other than the infographics, which I also appreciated a lot.
Yeah, I would say Sea Shepherd, the coolest part, and the infographics second, personally. But
yeah, I would put them in that order, too. I didn't mean to imply otherwise.
Yeah, I like anything that the Sea Shepherds are in, because I think that the work they do in terms of direct action is like very good and cool. They're one of the organizations that I think is really leading on so many of these issues and demonstrating, again, an alternative that is not discussed, is just that it's like there is the possibility and capacity for direct action and collaboration with these. Like, especially as the Sea Shepherds start to collaborate with the local governments of countries that are affected by over and illegal fishing. Like, that demonstrates a way that Western countries can actually start to do things to rein in these problems, that we can actually like have some kind of direct influence on these issues rather than waiting for policy to come in or just hoping that our consumer choices change the world. Is to say that it's like, donate to the Sea Shepherds, give them money so they can buy more boats and have more impact, because they're doing great work.
Well, that's the other thing, though. Like, I don't know how many boats Sea Shepherd has, but it's surely a lot less than like any major government has. So I don't know about like West African governments. Apparently it's very hard for them to actually like patrol their territorial waters, legitimate. But like these are like the kinds of operations that governments could be doing right now in partnership with like the Liberian government or other governments in Western Africa or other places where there's a lot of like fish poaching or whatever the term is going on.
Yeah, like imagine the US Navy.
Yeah, like why aren't they doing this shit?
Yeah. Like instead of having all of those boats, drone striking children in Yemen, what if they were preventing illegal overfishing? Like, wouldn't that be cool?
What if we had drones looking for illegal fishing operations? Like, I mean, you maybe don't need a predator drone for that, but like...
Right? It's like, we have the capacity to solve these issues. Like, that's one of the weird things, too, is that so much of this is, we actually do have the ability to make all of these go away. It's just, there's no desire to do it on the part of governments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which, yeah, that's, well, that brings us to the end of the movie. And I can go back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is that the thing I hated the most about this was that the only solution he offered was for viewers to go vegan. And that's just not, it's putting the issue on the consumer. And we know, as from our podcast that, and from anyone who listens regularly, that can only take you so far. And it's a great thing that you can do personally, but it's not going to change the world at the speed that we need it to.
Yeah, and actually, last week tonight, a few weeks ago, made a very similar point with regard to plastics pollution, right? That there was a concerted campaign by the plastics industry and like the beverage industry to make disposable plastic the consumer's problem. And we needed to fight back against that. And like you can apply that exact same logic to this documentary. And it's not to say that personal responsibility isn't important. I say this as someone like I came in really wanting to like this documentary because I stopped eating fish as a result of researching seafood sustainability labels and realizing that overfishing was so bad that they couldn't possibly fix the problem. So like, I agree with the exact point this guy was making, but like you have to go further because not everybody's going to be able to or willing to do that, you know?
Well, and now because it was such left-wing propaganda that anybody who might have changed their minds on it are going to be put off.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't even say left-wing because there's nothing about the government in there.
Not only was there nothing about the government, there was nothing about popular action. Like, it's a very bourgeois reactionary kind of like take on consumer power.
It's something that the right is going to latch onto and be like, this is how liberals think. And it's like, no, he's an idiot.
I mean, I think there was, we haven't talked about this yet, but I think there was some value in the documentary in that I do think it's true that environmental NGOs, they pull their punches when it comes to animal agriculture. And like, I don't know that he really made this point as effectively as he could have, but I think he was trying to get at that issue, you know, like, why are we focusing on straws when the real issue is fishing? And like, that's a false dichotomy. We should focus on both. But it is true. Like climate activists, I mean, a lot of actual climate activists will say that they should go vegan in their lives. But if you look at the talking points of like major campaigning organizations, none of them have veganism as an important aspect of what they're doing. And the same is true with like fish sustainability, right? Like this, it's just not a thing that it's not a thing that makes it into the public discourse because people know it'll be unpopular. And so as a result, we don't even have the fight.
Yeah, and it sucks.
We are coming for your burgers is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I applaud his energy, and he obviously cares a lot about this, or he wouldn't, like, this was obviously a monumental effort. You know, it's not like it was nothing.
He had Netflix money, Kyla. Don't be nice to him.
Did he? I thought he did it on his own and then shopped it around. I thought, but I don't know.
He eventually got Netflix money, Kyla. Don't be nice to him.
Okay.
And like one of the alternatives also that it doesn't sort of spread out. And this was some really good reporting, I think, from the Grist about sort of recycled plastic and how it's a technology that's existed since the 1970s, but has never been economical because virgin plastic is just so cheap. And so one of the really easy ways that we could start to rectify that would just be putting taxes on new plastic. There are so many policy alternatives that are possible, that are things that we could be fighting for, that are achievable within current frameworks that would, if we put a 4-cent tax on plastic, then recycled plastic would be economically viable. Or maybe not 4 cents, but like X number of dollars on new plastic per ton. And then, you suddenly start to see a change in how plastic is disposed of. And it's that simple. So there are so many possibilities for alternatives. And much as as a vegan, I support everyone going vegan, it's like portraying it as the only option is also just false.
Yeah, and just irresponsible because it makes people feel powerless.
Yeah, and I read a really interesting policy proposal today that I think would have been it's the one I think he should have ended with. And the proposal is essentially to ban all fishing on the high seas. So fishing could only legally occur in the territorial waters and exclusive economic zones of countries. And the idea is by giving space in the high seas, first of all, you deal with the free-for-all. But secondly, you give fish species enough space to gain back what they're losing from fishing just off of coastal spaces.
It would also force local governments to invest in more sustainable practices, because if they're overfishing their own waters and they run out of fish, we got nowhere else to go,
Yeah, exactly. And by making it clear that you can't fish in the high seas, you'd still have to deal with the enforcement problem. And so there has to be that political will too. But you'd at least deal with the ambiguity that has created that sort of tragedy of the commons, as people want to call it, with the high seas, right? You can't just have people plundering the high seas wantonly like they do now.
So how can people support that?
So there is a treaty at the UN on the high seas being negotiated right now, right this very minute. So you can write your government representative and tell them that you want to see a ban on all fishing in the high seas, and failing that, at least a very strong treaty on the high seas that has good provisions to prevent overfishing. And also tell your governments that you want them to raise to lower the quotas in their fisheries to be actually sustainable and not just what they think fisheries can get anyway.
Yes. Those are some real solutions. I love it. Robbie, did you want to plug anything?
I'll mention them again. I stand the Sea Shepherds. If you want to actually do something meaningful to stop overfishing and illegal fishing, recognizing that one of the issues is enforcement, and one of the cool ways that enforcement is being innovated and done by a vigilante group is the Sea Shepherds. I haven't done any research on whether or not they are effective, but my feelings on direct action are that if you care about illegal fishing and overfishing, direct action gets the goods. The Sea Shepherds are doing direct action, therefore give them your money. If you would like to follow some POC voices in vegan spaces, I'm a big fan of Tyra the Saurus on Twitter. She is absolutely wonderful and doing some great stuff. There's a Canadian by the name of Rose who runs Cheap and Lazy Vegan, who does some amazing work. And then she's mostly on YouTube. Then on Instagram, there's Vegan Mob out of San Francisco and I think LA. They're a food truck bringing vegan food to food deserts in a pretty awesome and cool way. And they do some amazing work as well.
That's awesome. We'll link to all of those in the show notes as well.
There are white people tend to become the faces of vegan movement, and I think that's a fucking tragedy. There are lots of very cool POC vegans doing cool stuff, and they should get your attention more than whatever this weird documentary was.
And if you want to hear more about the link between veganism and white supremacy, we have an episode for you for that. Go to our Veganuary episode.
Yes. Yeah. And if you want to learn more about fishing, you can go to our fishing episode, which does cover everything that the Seaspiracy documentary does, but better. So was there value in this documentary? Yeah, I think there was, because it opened a dialogue for a lot of the issues that, it's kind of I don't know, it's made overfishing sexy.
I think it's this generation's Super Size Me. That's going to be my hot take.
I don't think it's going to be nearly that important.
Was Super Size Me important? I don't know.
I mean, it changed how McDonald's does their menus.
Okay, what if it is this generation's whatever Michael Moore's George W. Bush documentary was?
Oh yeah, there we go. That's a good one. 'Cause I don't even remember what that one was.
Me neither. It wasn't Bowling for Columbine. That was his important movie. It's you know the other one. Yeah.
yeah, the other Michael Moore movie.
I would say for as much as I obviously had problems with this documentary, it did finally push me personally over the edge.
Fahrenheit 9/11. Sorry.
I'm trying to make a beautiful point, Kristen, which is that there is value in seeing this if you go into it with all of the notes that we have, because it is the thing that has now pushed me over the edge on not eating fish anymore. And I knew it was bad to begin with, but the visuals really helped me with that. So that's my hot take. But do Kristen and Robbie's things instead of mine. And I think that's our episode. What do you think, guys?
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you for joining us, Robbie. This was kind of we decided on this pretty last minute, and you were a very good sport about it.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad that I actually watched it because I've been following a lot of Twitter discourse about Seaspiracy. And I was kind of like, oh God, am I going to have to watch this movie just so I can understand what's going on? And yeah, for me, it is going to go into the bin of vegan shockumentaries that I don't consider to have very much educational or informative value, but do have that sort of visceral, violent reaction that might turn people like me vegan. So it just gets added into that heap of similar movies, which is why I don't think it was particularly groundbreaking or interesting.
Yeah, I've realized though that so you guys are both impacted by the shock value. I think I interact with the world a different way, because for me it was a stat that changed my mind. And I think I'm very rare.
Yeah, I mean, this is a diversity of tactics in action.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Different people respond to different things. I wish this movie was done better for so many reasons that we've elaborated, but some people are going to see it and just be like, wow, that was fucking gross. I'm never eating a fish again. And so mission accomplished.
Yeah, for sure.
What stat was it, Kristen, that put you off?
It was the fact that 85% of fisheries around the world are overfished.
Okay. That's
in combination with a bunch of other stuff about how eco labels don't really change behavior.
What sea lice didn't
I mean, I was already on board with don't eat fish by the time I learned that sea lice were a thing.
That's fair.
Yeah, that was a visual I will remember for a while.
Okay, well, on that note, thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of that I hazard to say terrible documentary. I don't know if it was
it was fine.
It was a distinctly mediocre documentary.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, I was like, terrible feels strong because now I'm not eating fish anymore. So it did accomplish its mission. So very successful documentary. Cool. And we will catch you on the next episode.